you'd like to stand with me, we're going to sing "This World Is Not My Home." Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven. No, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Just up in glory land, we'll live eternally. The saints on every hand are shouting victory. Their songs of sweetest praise drift back from heaven's shore, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. Oh Lord, you know I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what will I do? The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. All right, good evening. For this evening. This morning we started talking about the concept of courage, what that looks like, and just, a little bit more in depth about it. And really, I wanted to make this more of a two-part series, because tonight is going to be talking about the other side of it, which is fear. But even as we consider that, you kind of have to go over the opposite of courage, which, a lot of times, yes, it's fear, but there's different types of fears. And so before we get into the actual opposite of courage, we'll have to, kind of look at some good type of fears that we are able to have. But as we do consider that, I want y'all to look at a picture and see if y'all recognize this. Does anybody recognize this picture here? I know one person at least. Grant is shaking his head, he knows. So the Iron Gwazi, as you see, roller coaster here. Actually, when I went over back to Florida for the holidays, Olivia and us, we went to Busch Gardens. And I don't know if you know, but I have a fear of heights, a really bad fear, actually. And so, while everyone else, all the kids, they're saying, hey, let's get on that one there. And I'm looking like, yeah, you're out of your mind. And so, everyone's getting on it, and, they're trying to make me feel bad for not getting on it. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get on it. So when you really look at this, according to Google, it says the Iron Gwazi is a thrilling hybrid roller coaster at Busch Gardens of Tampa Bay, featuring a 206-foot height, a 91-degree drop, 76 miles per hour speeds, and multiple inversions, making it North America's tallest and the world's steepest, fastest hybrid coaster. Built by Rocky Mountain Construction, RMC, from the former Gwazi wooden coaster. I know about you, but again, I said I was not going to get on that. But later on, surprisingly, I was able to conquer my fear. And, even every now and then, I'll probably still look at it and say, I don't know how that happened, how I was able to get on that. But again, the concept of fear is there. When you really look at the Bible and how, where that is used, it's actually used in numerous amounts of places. It's the concept of denoting fear. When you look at the most common of these nouns, if you will, or even Well, yeah, well, let's just say noun. So when you look at the most common of these, I'm not going to pronounce the Hebrew word. I haven't looked at any of the Hebrew, but I do have it here in my notes. But when you also look at the Greek, it's, again, this concept of fear, terror, dread. And theologically, you see that there are four main categories that can be suggested about fear. There's holy fear, there's fear itself, there's slavish or servant or submissive fear, and then there's fear of man. And so again, before we get into the concept of an opposite of courage, I'll go ahead and get out the way the good fear that you're able to have. So the first one, of course, you probably guessed it, is this concept of a holy fear. This is the believer's fear of the living God. Holy fear, we see that it's God-given. It enables man to reverence God's authority, to obey his commandments, and hate and shun all forms of evil. You look in places like Jeremiah chapter 32, verses 40, Genesis 22:12, and Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7, all attribute to that concept of a holy fear. We see there that it is, moreover, the beginning of wisdom. Of course, you look all in Proverbs, you look all in the Psalms, where it talks about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge of the holy is understanding. It's a feature of the people in whom God delights. There's the concept of fear of the Lord. God loves those that have a fear of him. Ecclesiastes 12:13, it says that it's the whole duty of man, to fear God and keep his commandments. That's the whole duty of man. So yes, in a sense, does God want us to live in fear? In a way, yes. It's the whole duty of man. It is also one of the divine qualifications of the Messiah. You look in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, it talks about this delight in the fear of the Lord. It's a messianic prophecy there, and again, it's attributed to Jesus. And so, in a sense, you look at this concept of fear, this holy fear. This is something that God likes, God wants us all to have. In New Testament times, even the term walking in the fear of the Lord was used in connection of those that feared God. And of course, you think of people like Cornelius. Even before he was a Christian, before he was baptized into Christ, it says that he would have feared the Lord. He would have gave many alms. And that was, in a way, a compliment. Godly fear, we see it stimulates the believer to seek holiness. 2 Corinthians 7:1. It is reflected in his attitude toward his fellow Christians, even Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21. Because we have this fear for God, we show a respectable type even for man. You look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18, and also in Romans 13, verse 7, there's this concept of give fear to those, that it's due. Honor, those that are in that position of authority there. Again, fear is there, this holy fear. Because we fear God, we fear man in the sense of this concept of awe or reverence. Again, it goes back to a fear of God. And then the other way, before, again, we get into the opposite of courage, is fear itself. And this is still, I could have probably done better with the notes here, but when I look at it, I put down that fear is used in another sense as in Genesis 31, verses 42 through 53, where God is called the fear of Isaac. When you look back there, and I'll go ahead and read that, Genesis 31. And it's actually going to be a little bit more of a discussion type than, just a lecture there. So later on, I'll have you guys get ready to read a couple of different places as we do consider and define fear as the Bible would define it. But you look in Genesis chapter 31, Genesis 31, verse 42. It says, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been for me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, so he rendered judgment last night. And so we see a concept of there where fear is attributed to the fear of Isaac. And so it says that, well, I fear because, again, the fear of Isaac was there. Another place in Proverbs 1, verses 26 and 7, talks about the fear that the people would have had. Their dread actually would have been turned upon themselves. And so again, it's the concept of fear itself. You're fearing fear itself. Even when the Hebrews would have entered the promised land, God sent his fear before them, destroying and scattering the Canaanites, or so impressing them with his fear as to render them spiritless and unable to withstand the invaders. Exodus 23, verses 27 and 28. And we also see in other places where fear in this sense is also found. In Job chapter 4, verse 6, it says, "Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope?" And so it's this concept of a fear of the fear that they have. And of course, again, that goes back to attributing it to the fear of God. So I want to just go ahead and get that out the way concerning, the fear that is not talking about the opposite of courage. But as we do consider this, the main point is, I'm going to go to scripture with this. The thesis for this lesson is 2 Timothy 1:7. It says, "For God has not," get that, God has not given us a spirit of timidity. And I think the King James Version would say fear there. God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and love and discipline. So that's the main point. If you don't hear anything else about fear, that's the main point. But questions I have for you all is, what are some things that people fear? Again, not the reverence type, not the type that we just went over, but fear as we know it, as the world knows it. And again, this is actually probably where I'm going to go around and do this again. This is probably what some of y'all actually fear, speaking out loud. But what are some things that people fear? Public speaking, okay, you got. I didn't have to go right there. So public speaking, what else? Death, okay. Snakes, okay, yeah. I think, Olivia, you don't like spiders, right? Yeah, spiders. Anything else? What was it? Final outcomes. Okay, we'll get into a little bit of that concept there. What else, Rick? Yeah. Fear to fail, that's a good one. That's another one that's in my life. I got a couple of those that we're going to talk more about. But all these are good things. Any others? Rejection, that's another one. You're right on it. Y'all right on it. What else? Fear of success. How so? Okay. Okay, yeah, no, that's interesting. A fear of success, fear of succeeding. That's very interesting. Any others? All these are really good. All right, so as we do consider this, of course, we see that Christians that were being put to death still worried about their lives. We're going through Revelation, and, you see how it says that keep the faith until the end, and you shall receive a crown of life. So does that mean, question for you all, does that mean that the Christians in that time, that they were fearless, they weren't scared at all? Is that what that is saying there? No, there was still that concept of worrying, but they didn't let their fear overcome them. And I think you probably heard the phrase from time to time, faith over fear. And it's really the concept there. It's a really good, good phrase that we can use from time to time, because no matter what happens in this world, we realize that faith should be over our fear, because God is bigger than the things that we may fear. And again, we'll look at this as we do move forward. But of course, as we see, God has told us on many occasions to not be afraid. God says, do not be afraid. And I think, if you look on Google, it'll say 365 times. There's this concept in different, depending on your translation, 365 times in the Bible, it says, it has a concept of do not fear. Now, I don't really think that's true. I spent some time looking more at it, and it doesn't line up. If anything, it'll be more so around, I'll say around 200, and that's including the concept of being strong and courageous. Again, all of that ties into a do not fear attitude that God is telling us. And so it's not 365. Just just wanted to fact check that. Yeah. But when we do see that, of course, we do see that God says it on many occasions, many different times. When God called Abram's fear, or when God calms Abram's fear after his battle with the kings of Sodom, the captivity of Lot and his rescue, God says, "Fear not, for I am your shield." Genesis 15, verse 1. When Hagar was despairing for her life and that of her child in the wilderness, the angel of the Lord again tells her, "Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Genesis 21, 17. We see, of course, again, that God would have even promised the Israelites in Isaiah 41, verse 14, similar words, "Fear not, for I am the one who helps you." With this, all throughout the Bible, we see that God doesn't simply command courage with no reason behind it. He doesn't just sit and say, "Be courageous. You'll be okay. Be courageous." No, in nearly every incident where God says, "Fear not," there follows a reason to have courage. And of course, that reason is God himself. God says, "I am with you." And some people may say, well, he's using that reason one too many times. Well, it's a great reason. Because again, God is bigger than any fears that we may have. Even just some of the things you all mentioned, God is definitely bigger than snakes. He's bigger than spiders. He's bigger than anything that we really would have a fear of. God is bigger. And so, yes, of course, faith in him over fear. And so again, in each incident, we see God commanding courage, not because it is natural for man to be brave and courageous, but because when God is protecting and guiding us, we can have courage because we are confident in him. And so it says, again, fear not. Fear not often functions as the command to have courage, even in the face of fear. And again, as I said earlier today concerning us as Christians, we have that opportunity to show that courage. It's an opportunity for us to be able to stand out. As everyone else is scared about things like death, and not saying, we don't have our worries about it, but we know that there's something better. We know that after this, that there's a hereafter. And so all of these things will help us to be able to stand out as Christians to where others can ask, why are we acting the way we are? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? Because, we have, again, faith over fear. And so as we look at the other two concepts of fear, we talked about a godly fear, a holy fear, and then we talked about a fear over fear. But when we look at the other two concepts here, that kind of goes along the lines of the opposite of courage. The other one is a slavish fear or a slavish fear. Really, when you look at this throughout Scripture, we see that this is strictly a natural consequence of sin. You go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 10, of course, you look at how the fall of man would have came about, and what happens when God is going through the garden, and, this is after Adam and Eve have disobeyed God. What happens when they hear, that God is coming? They hid. Why would they hide? Because they were scared. They had fear. And again, this is concept of a slavish fear. Also, Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1, it kind of goes along these ideas there. Proverbs 28, 1, it says, "The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion." Again, going back to that concept of one that is fearing, but it's not because it's a good thing. They're hiding because they know they've done something bad. When of your kids have come and, they've had good grades and they're trying to hide it from you? No, that's not the case at all. They have good grades. If they've done something good, they want to tell you about it. They don't, try to hide. They don't try to run. And so we see this concept of a slavish fear is one case of where this is the opposite of courage. This is often one that would come as a punishment. You look in places like Deuteronomy 28:28, and we have a lot of scriptures that we're going to look at. I think the scriptures in this sense especially will speak better than I ever can about fear. But here it says that the Lord will smite you, talking to the Israelites, the Lord will smite you with madness and with blindness and with bewilderment of heart. You see this concept of fear again. Also, this was something that was felt by Felix when he heard Paul preach in Acts chapter 24, verses 5. I need to catch up on the scriptures. But it says, but as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you. What made him so fearful? What made him so scared? It's this concept of a slavish fear. He understood that there was something bigger than him, and when he heard about it, he was frightened about the judgment to come. Hebrews 10, 26 and 27, if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of a fire which will consume the adversaries. I think also, and I don't have this one up here, but this is one that you may have heard from time to time, very sobering. Revelation 21, verse 8. It says here that, but for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. You know, again, you go back to the first word that was said there, but the cowardly, that is the fearful. Opposite of courage. Again, not the one that it talks about, there's this reverent fear that you have. No, this is one where you're fearful. It's a slavish or slavish fear. And of course, the other one, we look at the concept of fear of man. Now, there in some ways, as I said before, because we fear God, in a way we fear or we reverence or we respect man in a certain manner. You know, it says, fear those whom fear is due. You know, there's a certain sense of where we can fear man. It's this concept of respecting them. But as you look forward, this concept of fearing man is the bad way. Numbers 14:9, only do not rebel against the Lord. He's talking to the Israelites here, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. This right here is a fear. It's a blind dread of them and what they can do. You know, they're so worried, they're so consumed about what would happen to them that, you know, they rebel. They don't do what God had commanded them to do. This is something that we, again, shouldn't do. You know, we should fear God and not man in this area. Isaiah 8:12, you are not to say it is a conspiracy in regard to all that these people call a conspiracy, and you are not to fear what they fear or be in dread of it. And then, of course, Proverbs 29:25, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. And so the other two fear that I talked about, slavish fear and the fear of man, again, this is concept of a bad type of fear, a fear that we shouldn't have. This is the opposite of courage. And really, when you consider this kind of fear and also the slavish fear that was mentioned above, these both can be cast out by something. And when you really look at it, you go to 1 John 4:18. He talks about a love that we can have. It says that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. Question here, we went over 1 John, I think, sometime last year. What is this verse saying here? You know, if we have love, then we don't have fear. Can somebody expound more on this verse here? What is it saying? Perfect love casts out fear.
Well, the book itself says that love of God is obeying his commandments. If we're doing that perfectly, there's no need to fear punishment from him.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. For those that in here, I'm going to sum it up. You don't have to fear punishment from God. Because if you love God, you're obeying him. And therefore, you know, when the end does come, you're not fearing. You know that you've done all that God has commanded you to do. And so You're going home. We're going home to be with the Lord. But for those that have fear, for those that are not perfected in love, there's going to be fear, because there's going to be the punishment there. And so really good, really good. So as I said, we're going to look at a couple of things that were pointed out here. Reasons for fear, and really I'm going to talk about how to overcome them. And this is where I said that I'll have some of you read some of these verses, if you will. So could someone read Proverbs chapter 23, verses 4 and 5? Someone could raise their hand, because I got a couple of verses that I'll kind of point out. All right, Kyle, Proverbs 23, 4 and 5. Matthew, you want 1 Timothy 6, 17, please? All right, so here we find where we talked about, no, I don't think no one brought up finances. But this is something that we may have a fear of, financial fears. And so that's, again, it's a valid fear. And when we look at these scriptures here, we'll see, again, one place we can have a mindset to where we can learn to overcome this fear. And we're going to do that for a couple of different ones that were mentioned. Kyle, could you go ahead and read Proverbs 23, please? 4 and 5.
Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone. For suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven.
All right, Matthew.
Command those who are rich in the present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy.
Amen. So when we see these two, again, the concept of fear, of financial fear, in Proverbs 23, 4 and 5, we see that wealth and prosperity are fleeting things. You know, they're here, but then they'll be gone. And 1 Timothy 6, 17 is this concept of fixing our hope on God. Fixing our hope on God and not wealth. You know, yes, if we are blessed with riches, okay, good. We can share with one another. We can do what we can to honor God. But again, our hope should be fixed on that. It should be fixed on God. You know, to where if something even does happen, we hit a financial tumble there. You know, that's not where our hope is. Our hope is in God. We have no need to fear, for God watches over his people. Even Luke chapter 12, verses 22 to 32 talk about the concept of anxiety and fear. You know, we're seeking after his kingdom and his righteousness. God will provide. Another thing we have, who has Proverbs 27:1? Proverbs 27:1. Someone? Okay, Oliver, you want Proverbs 27:1?
Sure.
Okay, so this one we look at, this will be the concept of fear for the future. You know, we often have, of course, fears of, I don't know what's going to happen. But when we look at this concept, this is something else that, you know, it's a valid fear, but something we really need to kind of get over and overcome. Oliver?
Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth.
We do not know what the future may hold. And I think I had a sermon a couple of weeks back concerning, you know, just giving it to God. You know, we have limitations. And I think we should just be okay with that and realize that God, the things that we can't control, we give to God. We let God handle it. You know, we don't focus on tomorrow because there's just enough for us to focus on today. We do not know what the future may hold. And really, of course, when you consider it, you see that people, we don't like the unknown. You know, we like to be in the know. We don't like the idea that we lack control. So, of course, we know that there are some things that are certain. You know, tomorrow, if we do live, it'll be Monday. And so, in a way, that's kind of certain. If we do live tomorrow, I'll be older tomorrow. But other things, again, are less certain. And really, when you kind of consider this concept of fear here, we see that Satan plays on our fears. And this is a big one that he definitely does play on. Much of the concern, even over the year 2026, deals with the unknown. But again, we give it to God. Try to let that fear go. We know God is in control. There's a time even where Saul would have even went to a witch because God would not answer him, and he wanted to know what would happen in the future. 1 Samuel 28, verses 4 through 7. God comforted Isaac even about the future. Genesis 26, verses 24. Again, God is the one that is in control. We need to let him. We don't need to try to seek other counsel about the future. No, we let God have it. So try to overcome that fear. Another one, I think one of you said it about failure. Failure, that's a big one. We see here, who wants Matthew 25, verses 24 and 25? Debbie?
Matthew 25, 24 and 25.
Yes, please. And here, oh, no, you're good. No, go ahead. Yeah, no, you're good.
Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours.
So here, of course, we've heard this, probably one too many times about the man with the 1 talent. Well, you see that here, fear is kind of there as well. The man given 1 talent feared failing his master. Instead of going out and doing what needed to be done, he feared, and so he buried this talent. He feared of failing. As the fear of failing, we see that this is really the great immobilizer. We would rather stay where we are than to risk failure and the unknown. What we see is that in Judges 7, verses 2 and 3, that an army of the fearful is no army. Someone read Judges chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, please. An army of the fearful is no army. Judges 7, verses 2 and 3.
The Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand. Let Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now, therefore, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained.
Again, an army of the fearful is no army. And so God, he would say, go home. And we'll talk even a little bit more as we begin to close. Another fear that may be present at times is criticism. We don't like to be criticized. There's a big fear there. Either criticism or even peer pressure. But what we see in places like Proverbs, and I'll read this one here, Proverbs 29, verses 25. Proverbs 29, verses 25. And as we consider this, we see that we want others to think well of us. So we fear doing things that others may not like. And so Proverbs 29, verses 25, it says, the fear of man brings a snare, but he who trusts in the Lord will be exalted. And I think I already have that up there. The fear of man brings a snare. We shouldn't really be worried about, what man will think. Of course, there are probably some exceptions there, but for the most part, we should be worried about what God thinks. What God would have us to do. We should be trying to please him, not please man. And so we see that so many really go into sinning because those around them are joining in. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 10 through 16 will kind of talk about that concept of where, I believe Solomon was the one writing at that point, and he's telling his son, if sinners entice you, don't go with them. Don't go with them. Notice that sinners are trying to entice Solomon's son. And so we realize that there is wisdom in not going with the sinners and doing what they're doing. We even see here, fast forwarding to the time of where Jesus was walking the earth. In closing chapters of his life, he says that Peter even denied knowing Jesus because of those around him. Matthew 26, verses 69 through 75. We see also, fast forward again, of where Joseph, a secret disciple, in John 19, verses 38, he was too scared of the opinions of others to confess Christ. We often try to go to Nicodemus, and although it doesn't say it, it says that he went by night, but you see later on that Nicodemus is with Joseph, and it says that Joseph of Arimathea, he the way he feared. He feared what others would have thought of him. Romans 10, verses 9 and 10, we see that there is this opposite of what we should, of what, this type of fear is. It said we shouldn't be considered a secret disciple. And so we consider Romans chapter 10, verses 9 and 10. It talks about this concept of confession. We see that salvation only comes by even making a public stand. We confess Jesus before man. In John chapter 12, verses 42, we see that some would value their position with man more than their position with God. They fear what might change. But again, that should not be the case. Jesus was maligned, and we will be too. But we should not fear man, because God, again, is watching over us. Another thing we have, which we won't have time to get into, again, concept of pain and discomfort. We don't like to be in pain, especially if we know that if we're Christians and if we're doing the right thing and people hate us for it and they send threats. Are we going to stop being Christian because of that? Again, don't let fear overcome your faith. And oftentimes, I think I was in a study one time of where this one guy, what he said was just very sobering. He was being, I say he's being real, where he said, I don't know if, when the time comes, if we're persecuted like the first century Christians, I don't know if I'm able to endure that. And, that was shocking. But again, that may be how some of us are thinking at times. And so we need to try to, again, prepare ourselves, cast out this fear, perfect the love, because again, love, it casts out fear. Then, of course, I think we said death. Debbie, I think you had said death there. This is the last one, and then we'll close here. Where we see that though we all understand that we must die, at least in theory, we do not like to apply the concept to ourselves. In places like Hebrews 9 and 27, it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this, the judgment. After this, the judgment. We need to realize that we do not have authority over death. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 8 will say. Of course, in some concept, death may be scary because it involves the unknown. It moves us out of our familiar surroundings. We cannot reverse it and try again later if it is not to our liking. But we see here again that others fear death because they do not know if they are prepared. We consider 1 John. We can be prepared. We can go, to our deathbed knowing that if we have done the right thing, then we'll be with God. And so in a sense, even death, there's some concept of where we can cast out some fear, cast out some anxiety, because we have done what God has commanded us to do. Fear immobilizes, and people do not prepare. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Fear is contagious, Deuteronomy 20, verse 8. There's the law where it was given about warfare. And again, it was telling them to not fear. When we get to verse 8, it's this concept of where they're saying, if any of you are scared, don't be around those, pretty much don't be contagious. Don't let others know about that. Or, you're going to scare them as well. And so it even talks about this concept of separation there. You need to handle your fear. And so as we close, we see that because of fear, many will not become a child of God. Because of fear, many will not grow and apply themselves to new service. Because of fear, many will lose their souls. We don't have to be among those that fear. It takes courage, but God gave us all we needed. And so as we do close, Psalm 61, verses 1 through 4, trust in God. Hear my cry, O God. Give heed to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a refuge for me, a tower of strength against the enemy. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. Selah. Like Joshua, we can be strong and courageous and not fear. That's all I have for this lesson here. If you are not a child of God and you want to learn more about that, or you want to be baptized or confess your sins, I invite you to come down to the front as we all together stand and sing the song of invitation, Seeking the Lost.
You may be seated. Those who need to partake of the Lord's Supper this morning or that missed their opportunity. Is Jason coming forward? Are you coming forward to partake of the Lord's Supper? Okay. And if there's anybody else that needs to partake of the Lord's Supper, you can come forward at this time.